afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me clearly. I seem to be reverberating in my ears, so that's a good start. So, good afternoon. My name is Professor Louise Waite. I am Director of Leeds Social Sciences Institute. So, on behalf of LSSI and the University of Leeds, a very, very warm welcome to this afternoon's event with Torsten Bell, who will get proper introduction in a moment. And as you can see from the slide, his modestly sort of ambitious aim to provide answers to the question of how to reclaim Britain's future. So let me now hand over to our introducer for today, Professor Shearer West, Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Leeds.
Thank you very much, Lou. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see such a huge audience here, staff, students, and local dignitaries as well. So I'm really pleased to welcome you to this special event organised by the Leeds Social Sciences Institute. And we're going to hear, as Lewis said, about a very small topic, that's the future of Great Britain, and how we address issues of inequality and stagnant growth from our eminent guest speaker. Before I formally introduce Torsten, I want to say a few words about why I'm so pleased that he's chosen to give this very important talk here at Leeds. Our country, as we all know, and our planet face unprecedented challenges. And research-intensive universities like ours are critical players in addressing them with government, with civil society, and with other partners. From our groundbreaking research to training the next generation of global citizens, the work of universities is felt not just in the UK, but all around the world. And in line with the current government's mission-led government, the University of Leeds is working with partners in the city and beyond to build a more equitable society. We're focused on impact in the broadest sense of the word, whether that's driving innovation through our industry connections, educating NHS workforce of tomorrow, or forging research collaborations to address climate change and other major challenges. And the Leeds Social Sciences Institute is an integral part of that mission by fostering the kind of collaborations that can produce research with impact. As a cross-faculty institute, LSSI is helping to deliver research that sets intellectual agendas, shapes global public debate, influences policy, and supports the training of the next generation of social scientists. And I'm very grateful to them for organising today's event. And now a few words about our speaker for today. The MP for Swansea West, Torsten Bell, is a Parliamentary Secretary for the Treasury and a Parliamentary Undersecretary for the Department for Work and Pensions. Before being elected to Parliament, Torsten was the Chief Executive of the Resolution Foundation, Director of Policy for the Labour Party, and he served in the Treasury as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors during the financial crisis. He's an honorary professor of UCL. He writes a weekly column for The Observer and is the author, as we have seen a picture earlier on, of Great Britain, How Do We Get Our Future Back? Torsten, we're delighted to have you here today. Really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So without further ado, I want to introduce Torsten Bell. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the most intimidating lecture theatre. It's almost like a court. I've got to remember to keep turning around to see whether this judge is coming to. Anyway, Louise, thank you very much for the invitation, and Shearer for the introduction. I was already grateful for the invitation anyway, because there should be more social science institutes everywhere. So it's good that Leeds has got one. So I was grateful anyway, but life throws things at you. So I have a new job from last week as a government minister in the Treasury and the Department for Work and Pensions. So social science is even more important now. So I'd like some answers. So if people can come up at the end, if they've got them, that would be great. So thank you very much indeed. New jobs often have lessons. Okay, so I had one lesson already. And this is for the younger, and I can see some youth in the room, some real youth, a winner at the back right, which is, if you're going to go into politics, which you should, that's the first bit of advice, write the book afterwards, not before. Because people get very upset. They all say, we want politicians who've thought about stuff. But if you actually do it and write it down and then get elected, they say, this is a disgrace. They had some views before they were elected. They should be decapitated immediately. So anyway, that's just me moaning about the state of life. Now, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the book, and then we're going to have a nice a conversation about it, and then you're going to ask some less nice questions afterwards. But just by way of motivation for the book and to encourage some audience engagement, because life's too short to have dull lectures. Who thinks Britain is going great? Hands up. Come on, that's it. Bold, sir. And we can see that from your choice of jacket. Who thinks it's not going great? There, right, so that's why the book exists. Oh no, here we go. That's the book. You've already seen that. So I'm going to show you, I promise I'm not going to show every chart from the book, but this is one chart from a poll we did for the book, and it basically tells you one really simple story. Everybody thinks things have not been going great. So this is telling you in red the proportion of people that think Britain has not been doing great, either very much or at all. The important bit isn't, you probably aren't surprised, this poll was done before the election, so Labour voters didn't think it was going great. That isn't a surprise. What's important is that nobody thinks it was going great. Tory voters, it is true for young and old. In fact, actually, old people tend to think it's been going even less great than younger people. And all incomes, right? It's everybody, as our votes, as we've just shown. So that was the motivation from those facts, but also from people, going around the country doing public events, and there being a kind of thirst for people wanting to understand why is it going so wrong, and obviously, ideally, a bit of what do we do about it. And what I'm going to take you through is drawing on 9 years of research when I was working at the Resolution Foundation, which is a small economics charity focused on the living standards of low and middle income households, insofar as we've got to the answer. And the first thing to say is in big picture answer terms is that the book is arguing, insofar as there's the problem is economic. It is not, in the way you might see in some other countries, a kind of culture war. And you might think from some of the press coverage of things, the real issue is we've never been so divided on cultural issues, it's woke versus unwoke. That is only true if you are trying to run a certain set of newspapers, right? In the real world, on most measures, there is not a culture war in Britain, right? We do not have abortion right at the centre of our politics. We don't have kind of wildly diverging issues on most. This is the good bit. It's going to get the bad news is coming later. I'm doing the happy bit. On most cultural issues, Britain is a reasonably cohesive society. On issues of race and ethnicity, we're more integrated than we've ever been. If you look at questions for the public about what it takes to be truly British, things that might have counted as divisive, most of those attitudes have been shrinking fast. Basically, there's not a culture war because the reactionaries have lost on almost every metric. It doesn't mean it's gone away totally. But with the public, as opposed to elite opinion or people that want to try and manufacture it, we have basically won, right? That is not true on the economy. And the book is arguing that insofar as there's a deep problem, I'm not saying everything's perfect, by the way, it's clearly not on lots of other things, right? There's lots of other on the cultural side, but it's not got worse, it's been getting better. On the economy, it has not. And that's a big topic. And so the book wants to argue, look, you can't focus on everything, and you definitely can't, I promise you, in government. So you need to focus on what are the big things. How should we think in big terms about the nature of the country? And it's arguing that there are two big problems going on. So I'm going to show you one simple chart of each. So this is a chart of UK income inequality. It's on the Gini coefficient measure, but it doesn't really matter what measure of inequality I used in the income space. Almost all of them look like this, right? And they basically tell you from the Second World War through to the 1980s, UK income inequality looks broadly similar to today's Scandinavian levels of income inequality, right? We looked pretty normal compared to other large European countries. It did change a bit, but it didn't change that much in those post-war decades. And then along came the 1980s, and UK income inequality shot up, mainly because the rich got a lot richer, but also because those at the very bottom did particularly badly. And despite what you might read occasionally on Twitter, it's not actually true that income inequality has been ever getting worse ever since. It's just stayed very high, right? So the problem is the level of income inequality, not that it's kept on growing forever. And the problem is that the level is really high. And the level is the highest level of income inequality in any large European country. There's at least one European country that is higher. Anyone know? Bulgaria. Anyone from Bulgaria? Few, right. We don't want to be Bulgaria. So we're not aiming to like beat them to get even higher, okay? And that has now been true for a very, very long time, right? And there's an argument which is it does matter how long you stay unequal for, right? Like these are not snapshot measures where the damage of being unequal just stays constant every year. The longer it goes on for, that's more generations growing up with large gaps between rich and poor. It starts to feed through to social mobility outcomes. It starts to feed through to health outcomes and lots of other things. So it does matter that it stayed high. The effects of it could grow, but the actual level, yes, there's been some changes. Like in my previous job, I really cared about the ups and downs on this. But big picture, like this is the bit going up in the 2000s is a mixture of housing costs and the very, very top did well out of globalization. That's the hyper-globalization phase of the early 2000s going on. The fall after the financial crisis. Why does income inequality fall after the financial crisis? It's not because the Tories cared about income inequality. Turns out a financial crisis is really bad for bankers. Who knew? So they had a bad phase. Right. So that's the chart of income inequality. If I draw you the chart of public concern about income inequality and poverty, it doesn't look like that. So it doesn't track income inequality. Okay? Public concern about income inequality goes up not like that, but shoots up after the financial crisis. When this chart tells you actual poverty and inequality, poverty was ticking up, but inequality wasn't ticking up. And the question is why, which brings you to the second. The 1980s gave us inequality, and the 2010s gave us stagnation. So this is a chart of average wages. Again, I could draw you lots of similar charts on incomes or productivity and the rest, but it's basically telling you since the financial crisis, Britain has basically managed to sustain no wage growth. There's some wage growth in some years, but over the whole period, no wage growth. If we'd carried on growing at the same rate of wage growth that we were used to before the crisis, roughly 2.5% a year, then people would be earning about £4,000 more a year. It's a lot more. No, more than that. Doing the same times a week. You can see £10,000 more, a lot. So these are material effects, right? The wage squeeze, and we've never seen anything like this. So I was in the UK Treasury, as you politely reminded me earlier, here when these banks were going bust, okay? In the meetings we had in the Treasury then, we were panicking about unemployment, repossessions, firms going bust, right? That's what we thought would happen. Nobody at any meeting ever said you might get a wage stagnation that goes on for 15 years, but that's where we are, okay? And that is the underpinning reason why British politics and everything feels so difficult. And behind that, I'll come on to this later, but behind that is slow growth. It's not because the rich has been snaffling all of the extra wage growth, it's that there has been none for anybody. Okay? And that is that's important for us to hold on to. Now, the thing then to do, so hold those two big trends, higher inequality from the 80s, stagnation from the 2010s, it's just a coincidence, those both happen to be Tory governments, honest. I'm allowed to say that now. I used to run a charity, I just have to go like, it's just complete coincidence. Put them together, okay? I want to encourage, this is a bit more complicated, this chart, but this is what I call the toxic combination of high inequality and low growth. Does anybody go camping in the continent in the summer? Like a good upper middle class stereotype? Right. I do, I like to go to mountains, right? That's why I'm suspicious of Lincolnshire as a place, okay? When I go camping in the Alps with my reluctant children and angry wife, right, I am hanging out, this is higher income households on this bit of the chart. I'm hanging out with Dutch, French, Germans, who are also, because we're all stereotypes from higher income households, and we have similar levels of, I drive a pretty similar car, I'm a bit tighter on food than the French, but my lifestyle is not totally different, right? I feel, in living standards terms, pretty similar. And that's what this chart is telling you. So this is difference relative to the UK in income terms of different parts of the population. So amongst richer households, we're pretty similar to the Dutch. French top are a bit poorer than the British top because they're a more equal country. And the German top is a little bit richer than us, but not much, okay? Now, most people that work in public policy or run the government are obviously not from the really top, but we're better off, right? So this situation of going travelling, thinking you're doing okay as a country is probably the lived experience of most people at the top. So I want you to focus on what the toxic combination of stagnation, so think about that in terms of a small pie, right? Smaller pie than we would like, less GDP per capita. High inequality, the rich in Britain are protected from that smaller pie because they've got a greater share of it than they have in any other European country. Everyone vaguely following? Come on, you're nodding, that's good, that's one. Right. So what happens is the rich are protected from the small pie because we're more unequal, but the middle and the bottom get stuffed. And I just want to focus on the numbers, okay? Because I think sometimes people think, oh, how different can it be? It doesn't make that much difference. So let's just focus on incomes at the 10th percentile, so not the very poorest, but just up from that, in Germany and France are now 27% higher than the equivalents in the UK. It's not 5%, it's 27%. Most of you look human, so let's put that into human terms. That's £4,000 a year. Right? If you want to know why food bank queues go through the roof when energy bills rise and people can't afford their energy bills, this is it. Right? You want to know why 11% of British teenagers now say they're skipping a meal because they can't afford it at least once a week? This is it. And by the way, that 11% compares to 2.6% in Portugal, a much poorer country. Right? That is where we have ended up. So that, if you take nothing else from this talk, the book takes several chapters to do this, but this is the diagnosis. If you put these two things together, it is very bad, not just for lower income Britain, but for middle income Britain too. And it's not surprising that people are pissed off. They should be pissed off. Right? That is not a good outcome to be living with. And I think people have not woken up enough to that. Now, the book then goes into how do we think about this problem, but then intersected with challenges around intergenerational issues where you'll know, in general, in simplistic terms, younger generations have had a tougher time in terms of home ownership. Hands up if you want to self-identify as a baby boomer. Come on. Come on, for some. Good, right. Who's a millennial? I'm like notionally a millennial, but not culturally. Yeah, right, fine. Some young ones, right. So millennials at age 30 have half the home ownership rates of baby boomers at the same age. Not because anyone did it to them. No one's blaming the boomers for this. I'm just saying factually, half. It's not a little bit lower, it's half. Right? On wages, millennials, particularly those that came into the labour market during the financial crisis, have basically had a disaster. There is, by the way, just to go back to that previous chart I showed you, there's a big gender divide here in a kind of good way in some ways, but remember, we have been slowly, very, very slowly, chipping away at the patriarchy during these decades, right? Slowly, I know it's very slowly. I'm not saying the patriarchy is gone before anyone shouts at me, but slowly we've been chipping away at it. Like number of women attending university has been higher than men since, for how long now? Come on. When did it first cross over? In the 90s. Every year since the 90s, there's more women going to university than men, all academic results broadly. Now, there's lots of other problems, but if I draw that chart by gender, and I looked at male earnings, the average male earnings today versus 2004, they are down by 7%. Men today are earning on average 7% less than men in 2004. Again, that's the background to lots of why people are not very happy. Before everyone says that means that it's all kind of bad for the young and not for the old, that is wrong. And by all of this, sometimes I hear in the media talk of like generational wars. It's basically garbage. Like there's no politics or truth in generational wars because people don't think like that because we live in families. Like I care about my mum and I care about my kids, right? So most people think like that. But it's also true because yes, the younger have had a harder time economically in recent years, but we are completely stuffing over older generations. So just focus on the red line. This is a chart just showing you basically any measure of public service performance has gone to pot in the last 15 years. But just focus on the red one, which is getting admitted or transferred discharged from an A&E department in 4 hours. Right? That's what's happened since 2010. You had over 90% were dealt with in 4 hours before 2010. We've quadrupled the number not being dealt with over those time years. And you see that across the board. Every Saturday, when I knock on doors in Swansea for 3 hours, I will always meet people with terrifyingly awful stories. Right? And it's the same if I knock on doors in Bristol, like anywhere in the country. Like the collapse of the NHS is the proof point in people's heads of Britain not working. Right? And so when people say, oh, it's just bad for the young, it's not true. Okay, who's at the hard end of this? People who really do need more care and support and are not getting it. Of course, social care in England is a disaster similarly. So that's what... On the diagnosis, I'm going to get perkier on some solutions, I promise. But on the diagnosis, I just want to briefly mention this, which is, it's an economics book, but it's aiming to talk about some political economy issues as well. And one of the things that really worries me, and is I definitely hear a version of without any charts when I'm knocking on doors and in the election campaign in June, is that this decline and its depth has now gone on so long, right? 15 years is a long time. Right, most of us can't remember Like there were, when did wages last grow strongly? Late 90s through to about 2003. So it's 20 years ago. There's some people in this room who look like they wouldn't, there's lots who look like they wouldn't remember that at all. So it's never happened. The danger of that isn't just that it makes our wallets smaller, it's that it affects people's psychology, right? Not only haven't things got better, but we start to think they can't or they won't. And that turns us into gloomy fatalists, which is what this chart is telling you. So this chart, just focus on the red bar, is showing you the proportion of people who think that the economy was going to get worse, right, in the year ahead. So I'm just using it as a proxy for economic gloom. We've become gloomy, right? And that's because of the economic fundamentals. Things haven't got better, so we don't think they will get better. And that is a really bad place to be. And that is the kind of fatalism that populists breed of. Like, if you're that gloomy and someone says to you, let's just, like, it's really bad, it can't get any worse, let's just roll the dice and do something bonkers. Because how much worse can it get, right? This is what gives you kind of Nigel Farage wandering around, that level of gloom and pessimism. And that's what we need to sort out. Right, now let's turn to a bit of the answers, because one danger in these books, and as I say, another reason why you should write these books after politics, not before, is because if you put answers in them, people get upset. But I'm going to give you some of the answers subject to my new responsibilities. What are we trying to do? Okay, so what we're trying to do, as I've said, isn't just, and this is how I think about the government as well, this bit, okay? The task, yes, it's to turn around the economy and to rebuild public services. Right? It's not that complicated, right, in lots of ways, what this government needs to do. Wages need to rise, and the NHS needs to work. There's lots of other things. I'm going to spend hours and hours on lots of other micro things, but in big picture terms, in 4.5 years' time, what will this government be judged on? Those two things, right? Why are we doing it? Why do we want to do that? It isn't just to do those things. It's because we think that is how we rebuild faith that mainstream politics can actually make a difference, right? And that's how we stop the country getting into a doom loop of bad economics, bad politics, populism, back to bad economics. And then what do you become? Italy without the pizza or the nice weather. Okay, that is what we are trying. That is what we're trying to do. Don't tweet that bit. Right. So, big picture. How do we think about doing that? So, I'm not going to go into loads of detail of this because it's a bit techy. But the book is arguing for a kind of two-pronged approach. The first thing is you need a new kind of patriotism, because one of the problems in the political debate, if I'm honest, is that a lot of people just basically don't like Britain very much. Right? They pretend they do. They pretend they're being patriotic. They'll even have a flag, usually, but then they go through a whole list of reasons why modern Britain is rubbish. It's too diverse, there are women working everywhere, there's even some men that want to look after their children, the woke horrors. I'm being a bit unfair, but if you listen to Swillow Braverman for more than 5 seconds, which you shouldn't do for your blood pressure, then you come away thinking this is just a terrible country. It's just like, the people are awful, you're all soft, if there's a war, you'll all be useless. In it and all the rest. That isn't true, but and then there'll be usually a lot of nostalgia. So they'll say it was better in the old days when kind of basically just the man worked. He probably worked in a manufacturing industry, and the community was really strong because nobody ever left. Some version of that story, which was never true, by the way. Lots of people weren't doing those good jobs. They were doing very badly paid jobs, and lots of them were working really hard. But they forget all that bit of history, right? The book is saying, you don't want that, but you do need a patriotic argument. And we should ignore those who say, oh, you shouldn't be patriotic, it's kind of jingoistic. Like, that's just not, I don't agree with that. And you're definitely not going to win a political contest if that's your argument. But you do need to root your patriotism in a hard-headed understanding of what the country is actually like, i.e. be proud of the fact that, in Leeds, Leeds' future prosperity is built on different industries to its past prosperity, right? And that's just largely unavoidable. And it can be, and it can do that. So that's the first thing, a new kind of patriotism. And then secondly, radical incrementalism. So this is the more controversial bit, which is some people, let's do this a different way. Because one thing writing this book made me think is the problems facing the country are big, and it's about the problems, but there's also a problem about the way we think about the problem, or the way we think about the country, okay? So I'll give you 4 examples of kinds of problems that happen. So the first is denialism. So this is George Osborne, David Cameron. This is, I don't know what you're talking about, things are actually going great, even as the wage, which until about 2019, I'd say was the central position of the Conservative Party. What are you talking about? It's basically fine. Did I tell you how fun austerity was, really? It's fine. That one is gone, right? But people did say that one is gone. The next one is more what I call the Boris Johnson approach, which is boosterism, right? And that is, okay, things haven't gone great, but if I just say we're world-beating, that is the same thing as becoming world-beating, and I won't have to do anything to get us there. Luckily, we've kicked him out. Then, thirdly, now we're going to get into the ones that will probably upset people here more. A third one is fatalism, right? Which is I can't do anything about it. Sometimes that comes from the psychology problem I mentioned before, the depression. But there's like a left-wing version of that, which is, I'll give you a concrete example. I'm really upset that we left the European Union. If we can't reverse that, it's not worth doing anything else, because that's the only thing that matters. I hear this all the time. It's the only thing that matters. If we're not doing that, we can't make this country richer. It's all a complete disaster. Now, and I understand why people say that, because there's a lot of emotion tied up in the European referendum and the Brexit result for a whole host of good reasons for people, and it has clearly been economically damaging, as I'll come on to. But it's nonsense that means we can't make progress despite it. I'll give you one fact to make that point. The consensus estimate now is that Brexit probably knocks about 4% off the country's GDP. Yeah, I'm not going to defend it, but if I took an average of the estimates out there, it's around 4%. The gap in productivity between the UK and an average of the US, France, and Germany is 18%, right? There's a lot of catch-up to done. Like, there's a lot of other progress to be made as well as that. That doesn't mean it's not important, and obviously the government's looking at ways to reduce the levels of trade frictions. But it's not an excuse. Being angry about that is not an excuse for being like, oh, that's a reason I can just keep being angry about that and not try to make progress on all the other things that really matter to people. I told you it was going to be upsetting. Next one to upset you, fourth, is utopianism. So people often say to me, okay, you show me those charts, it all looks a bit grim. So we just need to do something really big, right? Sometimes they say things like, go big or go home. Come on, there's some nodding here. Who wants to go big or go home? Put your hand up. I don't believe none of you do. Come on, you do. That's it. Good honesty. HS2. Okay, that wasn't what I meant, but okay. That's a very concrete go big or go home. Just want my train line. Give me my train line, Matt. Okay. They don't normally mean that. Normally they mean a UBI or something, right? They normally mean that. And I always say two words to people when they say to me, go big or go home. Liz Truss. Because that is basically it was Liz Truss's argument. She was like, yeah, this lack of growth is really bad. It's really bad. So we should just do something mental. That's literally what she said in private and in public. She's not talking to me anymore, but that's what she thought. So it doesn't matter that there's these economic constraints. I'll just do something massive, and then it will all be fine. But it turns out things can actually get worse. And she has proven it. So it's lazy thinking to be like, just go big. It doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, right? And I'm being a bit unfair, but that is sometimes people's reaction to it's been really bad. Right, let's go on to some answers in the kind of 4 sections. There's 4 chapters in the book on answers, and then there's some good news coming at the end to perk everybody up. Before that, though, more depression. Right, so the book says 4 things. Let's focus on 4 things. Investment, jobs, housing, and fairness, broadly, right? There are loads of other chapters you could have written, but at some point the publisher says, are you actually going to deliver this manuscript? So that's what you got. So investment levels. So if there was one thing that Britain needs to sort out, and there are not, because there's 4 chapters, but if there's one thing, it's that we have just spent the last 4 decades being a country that doesn't bother investing in its future at all. And you can get away with that for a year or 2, right? You can live off your existing assets, particularly if you happen to be in the world's superpower. Like Leeds has got a lot of Victorian housing, so you don't need to rebuild it all the time, even if it is rubbish and cold and wet. That's the housing, not Leeds. Sewer systems, they last for decades. Right? You can live off them. You can even start running them down by not bothering to repair them. But at some point, that comes home to roost. And that is where we are. Right? And you see that across Britain in firms. So this is showing you, simplistic terms, share of GDP, private investment on the right, public investment in the middle, across the G7. Okay, so there's 2 things to clock here, right? On private investment, nobody has been as bad as us across the G7, right? We are overwhelmingly, miles away from the pack in terms of private investment levels. Now and again, Tory MPs nowadays say to me, we think, the reason that business investment is low is because of something you've done in the last 6 months. And I don't always whip the chart out, but I do say, we've been the lowest in the G7 through every single period of your years. And then I say, and if you want to talk about a broader set of countries, what is the only country in the rich bits of the OECD that's invested less than us since 2010? Greece. And not Bulgaria again. Greece. And Greece was having quite a big problem during that phase, you might have remembered, right? So it is bonkers. One country does invest less than us on the public side in the G7, that's Germany, which is why any of you that spend time looking at Germany will know they have problems in their energy and infrastructure sectors. But the Germans get away with it because they absolutely pour in private investment, right? German firms famously do invest in the future. They're maybe in the wrong bit of the future their car industry is now finding out, but the point is they invested in something while they were doing it. So low investment. Now these are numbers. I was going to give you one example just to prove how ridiculous we have been. Okay, so if I look from 1850 through to 1992, almost every year a reservoir, a large reservoir, we're not counting ponds here, a reservoir got opened in Britain. Okay, lots of years, multiple reservoirs. We even opened them during the Second World War. Anyone from Derbyshire? There you go. We opened Derbyshire reservoirs, including the massive one, Lady Bower, during the middle of the Second World War. So we could fight a war and open reservoirs, it turned out. Right? We actually dropped bombs on them as well, but that's a separate issue. We have not opened one reservoir in Britain since 1992. Not one. How much has the British population grown since 1992? Come on, who's a demographer?
10 million.
Oh, that's suspicious.
Because I don't like privatisation.
Well, you know the demography because you don't like privatisation. That's. Oh, you know that fact, right, good. Okay, well, you're right anyway, for whatever the motivation. So, yes, the population is up by 10 million since 1992, but apparently we didn't need to build any reservoirs. What was the story we told ourselves? Supporting the anti-privatisation argument over here. We are such geniuses that we can sweat these assets much more efficiently, by which we meant don't invest in them or repair them, and that will make it all okay. And that is why, who likes outdoor swimming? Come on, you're on brand, come on. More of you. I don't believe that's not true for more of you, that's better. Right, but that is why you're swimming in horrible water a lot of the time. Because if you don't invest in your systems, there are then outcomes for it. But that's just one example. Potholes, if I knock on doors in Swansea, when they're not telling me about the NHS, they're saying, just out of interest, since you've knocked on my door, why are the roads collapsing? And I say, it can't be it's not AI doing that, is it? It's not like this other country you don't like, and it's not wrong. If you don't invest, your roads fall apart at some point, right? Trains, all the rest. The train we got on this morning, I've not even seen one of these for years. It was one of those proper, you know, those old intercity ones. I thought they'd been illegal. But it took me all the way here. Now, it wasn't slow, although the heating system was broken, so it was very sweaty. But you know, they should have been retired quite a long time ago. So you've got to raise investment levels. That's public investment. The book goes into ways to do that. That matches pretty closely what the new government has done. Although people do occasionally say to me, you know, this new government hasn't done anything. And I'm going to say this politely, but that is garbage, right? The changes in public investment levels announced in the budget, by the way, there's lots of things, I'm not asking you to like everything the government's done, right? But like the changes in the budget on public investment mean the highest sustained levels of public investment in almost any of our lifetimes, right? 2.6% of GDP average over 3 years. We haven't sustained that since the 70s, and in the 70s that included digging lots of coal mines, like stuff that we wouldn't call public investment now, right? These are big changes. They are big. So on the public and the private investment obviously requires lots of other things, including allowing things to get built. Right, investment. You need to do some, otherwise your country will be stuffed. Jobs. Now, before I come to the chart, lots of books. I read lots of books, or I did until I had this new job, and now I don't get to read anything. If you read most books about economics in the 2010s in particular, they said, there's a new wave of robots coming. After they started saying that, they then said, AI is coming, right? Then they write a load of chapters saying, so there won't be any jobs. They normally then have a ludicrous prediction. 25% of jobs will be abolished by 2030, and then they usually have, that normally goes on for quite a few chapters, and then they have a really short chapter of policy at the end where they say, either blind panic, ban the robots, or they say we should have a UBI and no one's going to work again. Right? I'm being a bit unfair, but if you wanted to make money writing a book, those are the books people wrote year after year through loads of the 2010s. If anyone wrote one of those books, I'm not judging, we all need to make a living somehow. It's total garbage. The idea that there's any sign of us moving towards a post-jobs world, there's no empirical evidence for. I'm not saying it couldn't ever happen. It is theoretically possible that technology could drive that outcome. How about we worry about that when it looks like it's actually happening, rather than spend all our time worrying about that, which is what all these bloody academics and policymakers spent the 2010s doing, rather than worrying about the fact that people's actual jobs weren't good enough, right? So the book they should have been writing is, yes, we've made progress on low pay, which is true. The minimum wage, including during the Tories' years, rose very significantly. But job satisfaction for the lowest paid quarter of workers, the red line, has been coming down. Now, it used to be higher than the average. There was more relaxed work in some ways, some kinds of low-paid work, or at least less structured, less involving other people and less computers involved. But it's been falling significantly, even while lower paid wages have been rising. And that should encourage us to think about what else is going wrong. And there's lots of things going wrong. The work was becoming more intense, but the nature of work for lower paid people is very different to the nature of work for higher paid people. Right? And I think some of that is obvious, and some of it's been brought out actually by COVID, the move to work from home for professional classes. But most people in this room, say my kid gets sick tomorrow, okay? It will cause a nightmare with the whole voting problem in the House of Commons, but okay, do it in the Resolution Foundation world. Before, when I was just doing a normal professional job, my kid was sick, I would just stay at home for the day, do as much work as I could, and get paid in full, right? I could manage it around my life. If that obviously isn't true if your job involves going to work in a shop. If your kid's ill, you won't get paid if you look after them at all, right? So that's just like the way, that's the nature of the labour market for those jobs. Our sick policy does that. So again, if I am sick for the day, I'll get paid in full. How much does someone who's reliant on statutory sick pay have to live on for a week of being sick? Anyone know? 90 quid. It's 90 quid after a 3-day waiting period. Including the 3-day waiting period, £43 to be sick for a week. Anyone want to put their hand up and say they can live on £43 a week? Because I definitely can't. So what's the outcome of that? You can't be sick. Right? Now, we saw that during COVID. If you look at care homes that relied on statutory sick pay, they had higher death rates than care homes that had occupational sick pay, more generous sick pay, because people could actually stay at home in the latter, and they didn't. In the former, they had to go into work, and they did go into work when sick, and people died. Now, that's an extreme version, but just generally, that is not a world where we're respecting workers equally. The same thing applies to, I'm not saying my job isn't stressful, but I know exactly how much I'm going to get paid every month, and I can control my hours to some degree, right? If I'm working on a 0 hours contract, I've got zero control. I can have it changed. It's perfectly legal for someone to be on the way into work and have their hours cut, right? They've paid their childcare. I've had this happen. There's a story in the book, I think it's in the book, about sitting on a train coming in from Stansted to London, and a guy gets on at the train station after me, and he sits down opposite me, he's got his sandwiches in his hand, and his phone rings just as the doors close, and I can only hear his side of the conversation, but he's basically, the person he's talking to is saying, oh, you don't need to come in today. And he's saying, I paid my childcare, I've already bought my train ticket, I'm on the way in. And the person's saying, that's interesting. And the guy got off at the next station and went home, not paid. And that was completely legal, right? Totally legal. Again, could I pay my mortgage if that was how my life? No. And almost no higher earners could, and they wouldn't even imagine that being how they were treated. So don't focus just on the wages, is what the book argues. Focus on the dignity and respect for workers. Lower paid workers are not there just to deliver lower prices for higher income households. They're there to be treated as fellow citizens who happen to be, yes, engaging in some work with us, but that is not, and that has been forgotten. And again, it's not for me to make the case for the whole government, but stuff that's in the employment bill that will be coming through next year, what happened to that man on that train will be illegal once we finish passing this bill. That will not be happening. Does not mean the labour market will be perfectly fair. There'll be lots of other things to deal with, and you've got to enforce labour market rights, not just legislate for them, but it is a big change. Right, I should speed up. Housing. Just to say, housing is basically a basket case. I won't go into, you all know this. This is showing you, the public press discussion tends to focus on home ownership, right? The stat I told you earlier, the young today, they can't own a home. The only thing worse than the falls in home ownership is the rise in housing costs. So this is housing cost to income ratios. What proportion of your income do you spend on housing? Yeah. Over the last 45 years. Now, this is telling you two things. One, it's gone up a lot, okay? And secondly, it's astronomical for low-income households. Now, just focus on the bottom 20% of the population. Right, that is an average. The average is 35%, 30 to 35%, right? If you're in some bits of the country and you're poor and you're privately renting, that is 50%. 50%. Now, that's happened for lots of different reasons. But in terms of what we do about it, you do at some stage have to actually build some homes. And there's lots of other things we can do, but building homes is essential. And people often say to me, and the left has been, including my party, too often, has taken the easy answer, which is, okay, some people don't want me to build homes near them. I understand that. Totally reasonable. People don't want the disruption. But if we go along with just what the incumbents who already own the house next to that building site want, poorer households get stuffed, right? Now, Tories make the argument, they say, okay, I can agree with my constituents who don't want this building, because I say it's bad for the environment, or I say it shouldn't go here, it should go somewhere else. Sometimes Labour MPs say, I'm going to oppose it because this is gentrification, because I'm just building posh flats in the middle of Leeds. I understand why people say those things, but it isn't true, right? The evidence is pretty clear that if you do not build enough houses, the yuppies don't go away. They just take some houses and push up some prices of poor people already living there. Okay, it's not the housing causing the gentrification, it's the arrival of the yuppies. Okay, unless you've got a cunning plan to ban the yuppies, you need to build the houses. Otherwise, poorer households are the ones that are then pushed out or end up with substandard accommodation. Like, why in Britain do loads of people who are private renting choose to accept a lease on a property that's got mould in it, which happens every day in most big cities? Why does that happen? Because we haven't built enough, so there's choice. So that when they walk into that property, they can say, no, I'm not renting that. And the reason they can't is because there's not enough vacant properties and they need to live somewhere. So even if you don't like people building next to your house, or even if you don't like the idea that the thing is marketed as a posh flat, it is poorer households that are losing out from people on the left and the right opposing homes being built. And I, for one, I'm going to tell people the truth, even if they don't vote for me. Now, that's housing. Build some houses. By the way, as my favourite fact in the book on that front, apart from that our housing is the most expensive in the OECD, is that because we haven't built any houses, because lack of housing can show up in costs, that chart, it can show up in quality, the mould, it can also show up in size of property. And one of my favourite facts in the book that I had to ask the Resolution Foundation team to go and check 4 times because I couldn't believe it, is that we have been so useless at building that you can now, the average space per person in their house is now smaller in the average of the UK than New York City. Okay? Now, London's worse than New York, I expected that, but the UK as a whole, right, and we do have some open space, okay? The New York City, the supposed capital of the world, that is what happens. And remember, the rest of America spends its time laughing at New York. There's all these funny headlines about how do people live in these rabbit hutches, right? We as a whole are now smaller than New York City because we haven't built any houses. Hopefully that persuades you. Right, the last chapter is on fairness, on tax and benefits. This is the bit I'm not going to talk loads about because I've got appointed a government and I don't want to resign really quickly. So what I'm going to do is bash the previous government because it's safe. This is showing you the losses across the income distribution from benefit policy changes under the Tories. So just focus, it's poorer households on the left, richer households on the right. Just focus on poorer households. Because sometimes people will say to me, oh, you're saying this benefit cut was a bad idea, but it's only like £300 a year, okay? And what I always say is, look at the cumulative effect of all those years of benefit cuts. That is what happens. £3,000 more. That's the average. Always remember, that's the average. Very large families, it's more. Again, if you want to know why the country has food banks, we've reduced the income of poor households by £3,000 over the course of those years. I promised you a perky bit, I think, a while back. So let's talk about reasons to be perky. I've got 4. There are others available. First one, the Boris Johnson, David Cameron problem has gone away. Everyone basically now gets there's a problem, I think. I think even Kemi Badenoch gets there's a problem, and that's not just with herself, okay? Like, they think the country needs change. Most people do. That's the chart I showed you at the beginning. That's the first thing. The second thing is that policy does make a difference. The fatalists are wrong. Okay, so I'll give you 2 examples, one of which is in the area I'm now responsible for. So the minimum wage, opposed by the Conservatives and most business in the late 90s, okay, has now transformed low pay in Britain, totally transformed it. And I think people haven't understood, in the 20 years before the minimum wage is introduced in 1999, in every year, higher earners saw bigger pay rises than the lowest earners, every year. And in the 20 years since 1999, in every year, the lowest earners have seen the fastest pay rises in Britain. The lowest earners have seen twice the pay rises of the middle across those 20 years. Okay, these are not small differences. And did it cost jobs? No, despite what they all said. Not one. Okay? To put that in numbers terms, the increases in the minimum wage since 1999 above inflation, okay, mean that a minimum full-time worker on the minimum wage is earning £9,000 a year more than they would have been. Okay, these are not small differences. That policy has made a massive, massive difference. So optimism there. If you want one in the pension space, auto-enrolment, which is the policy from the mid-2000s, which means that firms are required to auto-enroll their workers into pension savings, has seen the gap between men and women saving into pensions almost completely disappear over those years, over the last 10 years. It's a massive, massive improvement. Third reason for optimism, Britain isn't actually rubbish. We actually produce lots of the things that the world wants to buy. There's no reason for us to be poor. Like, we are specialised in the kinds of services that global growth is particularly growing in. It's just that our market share hasn't been growing because we haven't been doing very well. And then last one, so last reason to be cheerful. Last chart as well, you've all done very well, okay? GDP per capita, proxy for income levels on the left side. And then this is showing you inequality on the same metric, Gini coefficient of income I showed you at the bottom, right? So the first thing to say is the United Kingdom is now poorer and more unequal than almost every country we would normally compare ourselves to, right? All the countries we normally compare ourselves to are in the up left-hand quarter, right? Yes, the US is a lot richer and a lot more unequal, but forget about them. They're a special case. This shows you that all the arguments that you can't get, it's not like a trade-off between being rich and being equal. We're losing on both fronts with almost everybody. All of Northern Europe, the Anglosphere countries in Australia and Canada. Now, that doesn't sound like a reason to be cheerful, but it is. Because what does falling behind mean? You've got a lot of catch-up potential. So we're very subtle in our design team. Maisie, thank you for your subtlety there. We're very subtle. It's important, and this is, I meant jokingly, right? But there's all these books written about global productivity growth has slowed down. Is it because technology's got blah, 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 blah? Those things are important, but not really for us, because we're nowhere near the global frontier, right? We don't need to be, become as rich as the US. We just need to start moving to being more normal, right? And so to provide an evidence base for what more normal might look like, the book says, right, just take the 5 countries we normally think we're most similar to. So Australia, Canada, Germany, France, and the Netherlands, right? Not the hippie equal Norwegians, not the really rich but really unequal Yanks. Just focus on those 5. And if we just aim to be the average of those 5 in terms of income and in terms of income inequality, just the average, not the best. We're not world beating, we're just normal. What would it mean in terms of people's incomes? And the average household would be £8,300 better off. And being normal is worth aiming for. That is the outcome of the book. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Torsten. That was really, really fascinating. Now, quick fireside chat moment.
Yep.
If you imagine a nice picture of fire behind us.
Got a massive fire in here.
Yeah. So I had 8 questions. Let's just go for 2.
8.
It's okay.
It's like PMQs.
And then we'll open to audience questions. So, start of 10. In this week of really pacey change in the global politics space, you've spoken today and in the book of the importance of hope in rather a kind of Obama 2008 way, perhaps. And as you ended there, of Britain...
That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said.
And of Britain becoming normal again, not necessarily great. So can you tell us, why you think this moment and this book that you've written, this kind of audacity of hope, is a really useful platform for us moving forward?
That's a good question. So the first thing to say is, so the higher living standards that growth brings and being more unequal brings are important in themselves, but I'm enough of a hippie to also think that hope in of itself is just really important to living a good life. Because thinking with a decent degree of confidence that tomorrow will be better than today is just that's true for all of us as individuals, and it's really important as a country. And this isn't just me saying this because I'm soppy and all that, although it is that. There is research that shows this, right? If you live in a world without much hope, your politics and people's approaches become more zero-sum, right? I can only do better if someone else does worse. You see a lot of that, or it becomes, if someone does worse, I will do if someone does better, someone else does better, I'm not happy for them because I will do worse. And you see that all the time. That's kind of what's going on with the house building thing. If these homes get built, which even if I know they would be important for younger generations or for households, I feel like something's being taken away from me, which it could be in some cases. It could be more disruption. That is a bad place to be. That isn't a country that's able to name some challenges and then solve them. And one of the things, as I say, I am a kind of bread and butter social democrat. We've just got to do the basics again. We've got to sort out public services. We've got to just make sure if people want to build things, they can be built. We've got to make sure that people, if they go to the hospital, they will actually get treated, right? These don't sound, for some people, they think, oh, those aren't big things, right? My actual view is a decent job, a decent home, a functioning welfare state. There's nothing a lot more holy than that. That's enough to get out of bed for. That's what I think.
Thank you. You've had a really fascinating career so far, Torsten, obviously working in the Treasury, being Chief Exec of the Resolution Foundation and now a Member of Parliament. So could you share some of the most important lessons perhaps you've learned through that career about how to influence progressive change from these different positions?
That is a very hard question. The lessons I've learned. One, I'm not sure I should always be I've lost quite a lot of elections. So I'm not sure I know the answers to all of that, and I'm trying to find out. And lots of what's been going on in my career is trying to find ways of doing that. I'd say, what did I learn from the first phase in government before 2010? Well, maybe the overall answer to your question is there are lots of different ways of doing that. And although people often spend a lot of time arguing with each other about which is the best way, I've aged into thinking lots of them are valid and done in different ways. So I'll give you a really concrete example, okay? So lots of people that you would broadly define as being on the left, for some people, being out on the streets, angry as campaigners, is how they see them delivering change, okay? And that is different to most of the choices I've made. I'm not saying I'm averse to a march, but that's different to my day-to-day experience. That isn't because, and in some cases I hear people talking as if the only way to do it is the kind of through the processes of politics and through the processes of government, and then arguing with people who say, no, the only pure politics is the hot politics of kind of protest. And the truth is all these things are valid and important, and they'll all deliver change in different ways, and a bit more respect for people who are taking forward often similar, not identical, progressive ends in different ways is completely that's what people should think. These are people have different roles in the political space. Those of us that are elected, I come from so Alistair Darling was my first big boss in British politics, unfortunately lost to us now. But what he taught me is that for elected politicians, particularly if you're in government rather than opposition, this is a bit corny, but a lot of your job is actually to take decisions. Why do we have democracy? Okay. It's so that we collectively can take decisions on some things we don't always agree on without resorting to violence or other means, right? That is what it is. Ultimately, yes, ideally, for good ends and the world gets better, but that is why we have the system, okay? And that is, I place a lot of value in that, okay? And it's why being able to take decisions is one of the understated bits of good politicians, right? The good ones understand that things are ambiguous and complicated like they are in all our lives, weigh the evidence, but know that the point of democracy is that you in the end need to, not just that you take the decision, and not all politicians can. I've seen lots of people on both parties who don't really understand that is a large part of the job, but then they can also be responsible for it, be accountable. I've only been a minister for a week, but that involved, even within that, I'm in the House of Commons being held accountable for decisions that we have taken, and on Saturdays I'm held accountable, and those are important things. So I would say I have aged into a slightly soppy view that there are lots of ways to change the world, that people will have different choices about the right ways to do it. Those can be, I'm not saying they're all good, but they're all important, and we should recognise those differences rather than kind of shouting at each other about them.
Fantastic. Right, thank you, Torsten. I won't ask you the other 6, don't worry. Okay, time for some Q&As from the audience. There is a roving mic, I think, in the back row. First of all, so if you could just wait until the mic gets to you so everyone can hear clearly, that would be great. I realise we're bumping up against 5 o'clock, but if you're okay for 10 minutes...
I'm definitely okay for 10 minutes.
Fantastic.
It's my fault for wanging.
Hi, thank you very much, Torsten. Really enjoyed the presentation. It was lovely to see a positive picture, very optimistic future fueled by data. So that I have two questions. One, because you use so much data and analysis, I wanted to ask you, also as a Swan Minister, where do you see the role of academics and research supporting policy decisions? And the second, where do you see the role of universities in getting back our future?
Maybe I'll just take a couple and then we'll put them together. Gentleman in front in the white T-shirt. In front.
Sorry.
Thanks.
How much blame would you put on the economic mainstream orthodoxy for kind of the state we're in as a country and the state a lot of economies are in terms of inequality and growth?
One more straight in front. I will come to other portions of the room in a minute.
Why do you think our politics has become so fast-paced that some backbench Labour MPs have already rumoured about when they'll get rid of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves?
Right.
That started nice, but ended with a sting.
I like pointed questions.
Okay, very good.
Go for it.
Okay, I'll do the hard one first. Do you know what? Westminster just basically hasn't woken up to how maths works. So, the majority is massive. They're not going anywhere. Like, I'm just saying that as a statement of fact. That's what happens when governments have majorities like this. And it isn't just... I've never heard any backbench Labour MP say that, by the way. I have had journalists. So there was a female journalist who I won't name because that would be mean, who I was bumped into the other day, and she said to me, "Oh, it's just a bit boring. All you keep doing is releasing this policy stuff." Do you know what I really liked? Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, because even when I went on holiday, I was worried I was going to miss something mad happening. And I said, well, one, you're talking to the wrong person, and two, get used to it, because that's what's happening. That's just like, again, I don't want to sound like a Marxist, but like the political structure is set. Like, there's been an election, this is the majority, it is going to be stable, and if you find that boring, then you can get stuffed. Yeah, it's basically my view. Not you, sir, but the journalist can get stuffed. No, I'm talking about the journalist. Now, blaming the economic orthodoxy. So my answer to this is some. Because sometimes, so the answer is obviously, yes, lots of things have been wrong. A really good example is the one you mentioned, which is saying that inequality didn't really matter and wasn't really a subject that should be discussed by economists very much, which I would be a bit unfair, but was broadly dominant through the mid-80s, probably through to kind of up towards the financial crisis, broadly. Not totally, there are definitely exceptions. The minimum wage work done by labour market economists in the 1990s is a big exception, but broadly the idea that you just wouldn't use that word very much in mainstream economics is certainly true. My only slight caveat is that you can't let us all policymakers off the hook by just blaming it on kind of fusty old men in Chicago as academics. Like, there are definitely, like, you know, policy decisions. Like, you know, why has it taken us so long to sort out the 0 hours contract problem I've just mentioned? It's not mainstream economics that's to blame, it's kind of policymakers. So you mustn't let us off the hook totally. Optimism is definitely what we're aiming for. And I'm definitely optimistic. Like, there is no reason why Britain is that much poorer than lots of other rest of Northern Europe. Right? It's just there is not that we can do better than this. That's that's the catch-up argument. But there's loads of other reasons to be optimistic. One of the ones is the ones you've mentioned, which is the university sector is a strong sector and is more important in 21st century economies than it has been. So we have a big advantage. Clearly now is a tough time for the university sector, including the University of Swansea in my constituency. I have constituents who are facing redundancy there, and it's a tough time, and that's obviously why we've taken a tough decision to increase tuition fees, which isn't something most people came into politics to do, but that is what is happening. But it's really important. Mostly when people talk about it being important, they mean two things. They mean it's a direct export / a good thing in of itself, the teaching side, or they mean on the science side, supporting wider innovation and the rest. On the social science side, which is the question you asked, Selfishly, as someone now wrestling with lots of difficult policy questions where the social sciences is what matters, it matters a lot. Like, we need a lot of input. And one thing, having gone from government, out of government, and then back in to government, is that of the 9 years when I was out of day-to-day politics, what I call the relaxed years, or the simpler years, the time to think, to realise where you were wrong, okay, which you just don't get in politics. It's much more like, here's 50 decisions you've got to take today, not just because of the news media, it's because of the volume, okay? And so you're inevitably taking those decisions informed by a view of the world, which you probably mainly held prior to taking that job, okay? And that, or you're just sinking under the volume of decisions, okay? That has advantages. You can take the decisions. It has big disadvantages. You won't be keeping in touch with what is going on. You definitely haven't got time to say, I'd like to take 6 months out to decide what I think about this. So it's really important that other people are, and that we're connecting them, which is why the Institute's work and others is really important. That's basically why I'm here. So obviously I think it's important.
Great, that's good to hear. Right, any more questions? Ooh, golly.
I'll do clicker.
Lady in the middle here, please. Just wait for your roving mic. Sorry, I picked the most difficult place to get to.
I'm not sure how to word this, so bear with me. The last slide that you showed, where you were looking at the poorer and unequal, and you pointed out that Great Britain was at the poor and unequal. Are you going to do that across the countries as well, and decide which regions are going to be there and how you're going to address that in government? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Gentleman at the back. And then gentleman here.
Thank you. Great talk. You probably can't answer this, but it's in my mind.
Here goes anyway.
Why can't you just put up income tax? What would be the negative to that?
Great. And then gentleman here, please.
Can you say when Downing Street's going to get its Communications Act together? Because that seems to be killing us.
Tough little sweep there.
Is?
Off you go.
It's always the third question, isn't it? I've got an idea. Let's take the questions in twos. I'm the policy substance guy. I refer you to many other people to ask this question about communications. I'm not sure I'm the expert on that front. All I would say is, look, when you go back into government after a long time out, there's obviously lots of things to learn. I definitely feel that. Okay. And because we are all frustrated by the state of the country, I've got a secret, which is not everybody in the media loves us. Most of them do, but not everyone. So it's not as, give us a bit of time. Give us a bit of time on the substance. Yes, some people don't like everything that's being done, but don't underestimate in the end, it's the substance that matters. Okay, the substance that matters. Wages rising, an NHS that works. It is that is going to determine, one, the future of the country, which is what ultimately matters, not our political future. But secondly, I think as a sub-effect of that, the Labour Party's political future. But the main reason to be doing these things, yes, would I like to be re-elected in Swansea? Yes, I definitely would. But the most important thing is that we show that the country can get better. And that isn't a comms issue, that is a substance issue. And that's what we are focused on. On the regions question, the answer is basically there is analysis that does exactly this for within regions. Some of it does pose questions for us, okay? So I'll make it really concrete for you. The poorer regions in the UK this is particularly true at a very local area, are also more equal. Yep. Yeah, I know, and that isn't what most people think. And so think that through, because it's important, because it tells you to think hard. You've got not to just go for the lazy answers, right? Because it tends to, it's not universally true. You can definitely get some really rich places within, like, you'll know in Leeds, there are some very rich places next to some very poor places. But overall, Leeds is a much more equal place than kind of, London. Right, because that's because you just don't have the very rich broadly. Okay, so think about that. because it's one of the examples of where there are some trade-offs. You need to think through the policy implications. But the answer is yes, there are. That analysis is done. I'm not an expert on it, but I've read it and enjoyed it and learned lots from it. We haven't put up income tax because we promised not to in the manifesto, and I just told you that I was about rebuilding faith in politics.
Okay. Last three questions, I think. Gentleman there.
Hi. Can you speak to the relevance of ideology and how it influences people's decisions?
And
That's a tough one.
yeah, and down at the bottom here.
Are you worried that there's being a bit much left on planning reform to kind of get 1.5 million houses?
Explain that a bit.
In terms of to achieve that, you're going to have to build probably 400,000 or 500,000 houses in the last 3 years, which has not been seen maybe ever, if not before the 50s sort of thing.
And then the last tricky third question, no pressure.
Break the habit. Nice soft one to end.
Earlier in the talk, you said about how we are economically worse off being out of the EU. And then throughout the talk, you proceeded to go, there is no reason why we are economically worse off than the rest of the countries in the thing. There's no clear reason. It seems like you are clear in your communication that being out of the EU is worse off for Britain than people like Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves might communicate. And I wanted to know whether that was an accidental slip or whether you believe that we are worse off and we could be doing better with better relations with the EU.
So you didn't buck the trend, really, did you? I asked you nicely and everything. No, what I said is what they say as well, which is... because look, I'm going to be honest with you, but that's what the evidence shows, and I'm telling you what the evidence shows, and that is what they're clear. I've maybe put a percentage on it because I spent too long working as an economist, right? And they kind of had more sensible life choices to get them where they are. But no, that is, well, in Keir's case, in Rachel's case, not the same life choice. But no, everyone's clear about that. But don't, as I say, what I'm saying is don't go from that conclusion to the, or if I can't get what I want on this issue, there's no point trying on everything else. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. 1.5 million homes is really hard. It is really hard. We are doing a lot. Like, I don't know if you heard the housing minister, Matthew Pennycook, on the... why is Matthew Pennycook excellent? Who knows? First Labour MP to be elected, first MP to be elected, having previously worked at the Resolution Foundation. There are now 3. They're all excellent, including me. He's very good, but he's not just good because of that. He's very good. He's very focused. He's looking at the evidence. These planning changes are large. They are really big. Are they enough on their own? No. There are other challenges. Volume of the construction workers, literally input to it. We're not ignoring those. But let's not, you know, we're 5 months in. Let's not be like, oh, this looks a bit too ambitious. Let's be like, what are we going to do to make it happen? Because remember, what I said to you is, we're trying to prove to people that things can be done, that we can aim for something and hit it. And, you know, I can't tell you exactly where we're going to get to, but we're going to try damn hard. Ideology, just to finish up with a nice, easy one. I mean, look, all of us, none of us are like neutral, and all of us have, you know, you can call it ideology if you want, you can call it priors, you can call it biases, so that's definitely true. And I don't think, you know, ideally enough self-awareness to know where those are is a good idea for making good decisions. The place where it's a problem is that sometimes when people have decided this is all a bit difficult, right? The substance is just difficult. Things feel hard. I'm being presented with a set of choices I don't want to make. And politics does present those, right? People will definitely come to me and say, Minister, like, this thing is happening. Which one of these deeply unpalatable things would you like to do? And you've still got to take the best decision you can. So when ideology becomes difficult, hello Liz Truss, and causes problems, is where you're trying to use it to escape from reality. You're like, reality is like this, but that doesn't work for me. So I'm just going to be like, no, there's no facts, there's no truth, there's just like what I believe, and that is in somehow kind of trumps the real world, and that is, yeah, then ideology can be dangerous. But I shouldn't like, do I have biases, and whether you want to call it ideology or priors? Of course, I have preferences, right? Right. I would, you know, I place a lot of weight on us not having large amounts of our population doing really badly indeed. You can call that ideology, you can call that motivation if you want, but yeah, we've all got those.
Thank you. Before we close, I'd just like to publicly say thank you so much to my LSSI team, mostly to my left here. So Sharif for coming up with the idea of inviting Torsten in the first place, and Cheryl, Elliot and Natalie for the huge amount of work that they've done for today, and my wonderful deputy directors, Salah, Jihan and Kate. And final word, of course, of thanks to Torsten and Maisie also for coming today. We've really, really enjoyed having you. We hope you will stay a friend of the University of Leeds.
You gonna stay a friend of me?
Oh, let's see.
It turns out, one thing you find is that, not everyone likes politicians. People were much friendlier before I got elected.
Well, it's starting out beautifully, so let's hope it continues. We've gone on a little bit, but I think Torsten's still got about 10, 15 minutes with us. So please join us downstairs for a drinks reception and ask him some more tricky questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.